Speaking of crime and punishment for what may or may not be appropriate, or is more accurately not appropriate at all, let's dig into the coming sentencing of former President Donald Trump. And before I get to this, I want you to know that his gag order is staying in place. The gag order on Donald Trump staying in place, the New York Court of Appeals allowed that to continue, a violation of his constitutional rights, unprecedented, as far as I'm concerned. But the crime and punishment for being found guilty of beating Hillary Clinton and turning the political establishment on its collective head is coming. The vengeance they seek goes beyond President Trump. They want to nail anyone in his circle. That's perfectly clear, too. You see, the corporate media is gloating over the prison sentence of Steve Bannon that he may or may not serve, hoping he serves time with the worst criminals of all. Listen to this.
Breaking news, Steve Bannon denied his request for the so-called Club Fed when he's forced to report to prison. Sources telling CNN that the longtime Trump ally will not get a cushy prison assignment, but is likely to serve time in a Connecticut prison where he could be placed with violent criminals and sex offenders. A prison that does not have individual cells, but rather an open pod layout for inmates. And CNN is learning tonight that there is also a chance Bannon could be sent to New York City's infamous Rikers Island.
And she's happy about that, isn't she? Rikers Island. Of course, CNN's happy to have anybody watching. What I was mentioning earlier, though, is this. A House Republican committee has moved to reverse the J6 committee subpoena against Trump advisors days before Steve Bannon would report to prison. They state that the J6 committee was solely partisan in its exercise, determined to vilify President Trump and his advisors, and if there's no subpoena because it's been removed, then there is no crime. We'll keep an eye on this development. But coming up on Thursday, July 11th, Judge Juan Merchan will sentence President Trump. The sentence may depend on what probation officials say. The sentence will depend on what these officials write in their pre-sentence report. And what these officials recommend, they have the power to recommend anything as a crime, but they will determine whether Trump goes to prison or remains on probation, out of jail, how much money he may pay. The recommendation will determine what happens next, including whether the election of Donald Trump as our next president will potentially happen at all. What these officials say will determine who has final say in our fine republic. What these officials write based on a virtual interview done a week ago will be part of the official record, and, of course, it will be paraded through the media, meat grinder all the while. Trump not allowed to utter a word because of that ongoing gag order. In this respect, with regard to the process, this is how the process works. That this is how our system of justice works is not enough to say the law is colorblind, because clearly it is not. It's not enough for these officials to say they have a job to do, that their work takes precedent over our right to elect the next president. Are we to believe these officials are without bias? I mean, how could we possibly think that based on the wildly biased performance we've already been witness to inside Merchan's courtroom, and by him specifically? Plus, his family's close ties to Democrats, fundraising, and their campaigns. Are we to believe they are so reasonable as to be champions of reason, choosing logic over the lunacy of what is clearly Trump derangement syndrome? Are we so naive as to suspend disbelief when everything we know about Merchan makes it impossible to believe this man is fair or impartial? By what right does a bureaucrat with a badge have the right to cast aside 78 years of Trump's successful life for the sake of editorializing about 34 felony counts? Is it right for a probation officer to reduce the totality of President Trump's life to a wrongful conviction? Come on. Is it just to dismiss truth and do away with objective reporting, ignoring Trump's success in business, victory in the arena, so Democrats can assassinate the character of the former president? Please. The purpose of this particular report, in my admittedly jaded opinion, is to further support injustice, not the fair application of the law. And I'm not the only one that feels this strongly about this miscarriage of justice, I can tell you that. Here is President Trump discussing the deep fake case against him. Listen.
The outrageous charges in New York were a corrupt creation of crooked Joe Biden and his group. And they really weaponized, what they did is they weaponized the Department of Justice. They weaponized all the White House. What they did is disgraceful. It was all planned and carried out by his thugs in Washington, giving orders to New York. All these people went to Washington. It was all one big thing, including civil cases, by the way. The case was completely devoid of facts, merit, or even any crimes. Every legal analyst, all great people, I don't have to go over their names, I go over them all the time, but all of the great legal analysts said there is no case here, there is no crime, he shouldn't charge, etc. But every single one of them said that. This wasn't a legitimate indictment. This was a Joe Biden indictment to try and hurt your political opponent.
And that's been the entire aim the entire time. The effect of this report is to support the sentence Merchan imposes, to give a big fat rubber stamp of leftist approval no matter what he says, no matter how outrageous. Thus, this is how the wheels of justice, more like the gears of the giant machine, turn on too many days. The reality of this machine, or rather the brutality of this state-run behemoth, is unjust. In reality, the probation officials are accessories after the fact. That's what they are. They give Merchan the cover he needs, the cover he wants to remove President Trump from polite society and cast a shadow over him. And they hope that shadow is long enough, and deep enough, and dark enough to keep him from doing one thing: getting 270 electoral votes. The officials are more like faithless electors. Electors who do not vote for the candidate for whom they had pledged to vote. That these officials do not want anyone to vote for Donald Trump. That they will do anything to deny him the freedom to take office, and they will not stop until he loses his freedom is clear and more criminal than anything he's been charged with. Their behavior, more criminal than anything he's been charged with. But unlike the faithless elector who changes his vote after an election, these officials have contempt for elections, period. They're trying to weigh in before the election can even be held. No doubt Democrats like to vote early and often, but July is too early for Democrats to go to the polls. The end of this rite, R-I-T-E, the ritual of citizens, U.S. citizens, going to the polls on Election Day, is to destroy our rights as Americans. And I want you to think about that for a second, because the franchise is sacred. The secret ballot is sacrosanct. And I want you to think about that and hold that thought. Because if we allow the unelected to engage in voter suppression, if we allow them to politic inside the courthouse, we will neither have the right to vote nor a righteous cause for which to vote, because it will all be predetermined. And that's the effort underway, to predetermine the election. You know it, and so do I. Thankfully, Trump is not giving